Are we all insanely excited? I'm gonna I'm gonna try really hard to not gush too much. I promised that I wouldn't embarrass her too much. I've done many of these seminars. I'm used to talking to this group. My heart's weirdly racing because Pat is my absolute idol. I've been following her all my life. This book is so insanely dog-eared. I've had this book for 20 years now, I believe. I've had her sign it once before because I'm a stalker. But she's had the most incredible life. I'm sure most of you know, if you're here, born in England, came here before the war to New York, then eventually making her way to San Diego, where she made a huge impact on Southern California gardening, has won multiple awards, San Diego Emmy, area Emmy, Horticulturist of the Year. It goes on and on. I've got them all written down, but again,
don't need to do that.
I won't take too long. Television, newscasting, books, obviously, an amazing artist as well. If you've ever seen any of her artwork, it's really phenomenal. One of the early adopters for organic gardening, really making sure that we are working with our climate, which is super important here. And I really realized if I ever move anywhere else, I'm gonna have no idea what to do because I'm not gonna have one of these books to go by. So without further ado, I'm not gonna take too much of the time because you're here to see her. Pat Welsh, everybody.
Thank you so much. Now, can you hear me, everyone? First, I want to thank you for coming. And it just warms my heart to see so many people I know and remember. Some of you, I don't even remember your names, but you're familiar faces to me because I've been speaking here at Rogers Gardens at least 20 years, maybe 30. I'm not sure, maybe 40. Speaking of numbers, I'm now 90. And I said a couple of years ago, I wanted to come here and give a talk when I'm 90, and here I am. And I'm sorry to tell you, it is my swan song. It's just hard for me to get up so early and pull the stockings on. I'm not a very good morning person, and it's just life. We do get older. So I'm still carrying on. I'm still writing books, but not garden books. And I want to recommend, if you want to buy online one of my month-by-month books, this is the best one to get. It's really very complete. And the all-organic one that they quit publishing so quickly, they didn't print enough copies. It was too expensive to print. And it's way high. It costs $200 or $300 a copy. Buy this one. You can still get this one. As old gardeners, 100 or more, die, they leave these books. Anyway, let me just quickly say though, if you have a garden club that's small enough and that wants to have me give a talk, I will continue doing it in my own garden. And the garden's different than it used to be. It's not exactly like the pictures you used to see, but I'm keeping it up. And yes, I'm still gardening with the help of some friends, some of whom are here. So anyway, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to begin at the end of my talk instead of the beginning, because I don't want to forget to tell you a story. And this is it. Years ago, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, I had friends who raised orchids. She raised orchids. They lived in Solana Beach, the town next to me. They were an old couple. She raised orchids and was a great gardener. And he was interested in antiques and had a little antique farm. Tragically, Well, first let me tell you that most of her garden was in pots. She had wandering paths with great big pots of flowering plants. Maybe some of you gals remember her. She lived on Nardo, and her orchids were wonderful. I bought some of my best Amphibiums there. One day I went there to buy an orchid, and tragedy. The orchid area was empty. She had died. She was very old. She had died, and her husband, not a gardener, let everything die in the greenhouses and also in the pots. It was just tragic. This colorful garden of wandering paths with gorgeous plants, all in bloom. Now I went there, and the wandering paths were there, and big pots full of dead plants. And I thought, that is not going to happen to me. I got the idea that at age 80, I would begin to get rid of my plant collections. Some of you may know I had marvelous collections of things like bromeliads and epiphyliums, epiphylium orchids, and wonderful fuchsias in hanging baskets. It was hard getting rid of them. I got rid of everything, and I'm still once in a while finding a pot. But mostly I would point them out to Raimondo and say, please empty out that pot. I would give away the plants that I could, empty out that pot and stash it. And I have a little area I call the pottery barn, or the pottery area. We stack up the pots. No, it's well, I can't even think what name I gave it. Anyway, we've got the pots stacked up in rows and no more empty pots. And I began to allow the garden to change as I aged, but become and remain just as colorful. So I just wanted to mention that, because the garden can age with the gardener, but we could keep on gardening. So even though I'm not going to do these talks of Rogers anymore, I'm going to continue gardening. I still write books. They're not garden books, because my publisher dropped them from print and kept them in digital and didn't give me back my copyrights. So in a sense, they didn't steal my copyrights because they have a legal right. But I can't write any more garden books. And there's one I'd like to write. I'm writing other books. And I don't know how I'll promote them, but I think I'll get the publishers, and I think we will do it sometime. Now, to go to the handout and talk about these points of how you can create a paradise of your own. And that's what I've been recommending for years, because the backcountry is disappearing. We can't get out in nature as much, and as we age, we need our own paradise. And this is how. First, my recommendation is create a garden of rooms. Now, I asked you in the notes if you have a style. And so many people say, I'm an English gardener. No, I'm not an English gardener. I'm an English woman, originally, who gardens, but not in that style. I have certain things I learned about gardening in England, and yes, I do those, and those are incorporated into this talk. But no, my style is Mediterranean. Mediterranean gardening is what suits California, with Mediterranean plants, things that grow well here, and not things that grow well in England, and not the herbaceous border. Who can grow a herbaceous border in America. No way. My parents tried in Pennsylvania and they failed. I watched it as a kid. I never said a word. So my first point is create a garden of rooms. Even, and Chuck Klein used to say, even if your garden is no bigger than a patio or porch, make them look round one thing to see another. But most people have a front and a backyard and side yards. Why not create those as rooms? You don't even need to neglect them. You can grow a beautiful wisteria down one side of your house, and that can create one of your rooms. And one way to divide up a large garden into rooms is to go up in the air. And I do that with arbors and pergolas. Now, how this began, things just happen to have happened in a natural way in my gardening life. Years ago, I discovered a place in my garden where nothing would grow. You could plant a plant and it would die. You could water it, it would die. You could feed it, it would die. A friend of mine, a man I knew quite well, said, "You know, Pat, that could come from the buried six-pack that your builders left. But it also might come from a buried pipe, which one of those spots where nothing will grow in my garden is a pipe down there, a great big pipe that belongs to the city. I didn't know, but there it was. It was an old rusty pipe and nothing would grow there. But then there was another spot, and what I believe happened there is that the guys who plastered my house and the guys who painted my house went down there and washed their paint brushes and washed out the concrete, pots or whatever they were using, and nothing would grow there. So I thought, what'll I do? And I got the idea, cooperate with it, put a bench. It was just the right size for a bench. I put a bench under it, and then I didn't hire some guys. I built an arbor over it. I looked up designs and I kind of modified them, and I built an arbor. And that gave me a place to sit in the shade in my garden, and I grew a climbing rose over it, which was a natural. Then I thought, oh, well, one arbor, why not echo it? So I'm on a slope overlooking the ocean, so in a sense my garden is naturally in rooms. So I built another arbor that led to that lower area, and then by golly, and I planted roses over it, a gorgeous climbing rose. And then about that time, I was then on television, so this must have been the 80s, and I had no set. When I first got on TV, and some of you may remember those days, I would do garden demos at Francie's house. She had moved to Oceanside and her garden needed fixing. So I got all this demonstration. I put in a window box. I built something around the swimming pool to protect the kids from the swimming pool, all this on TV. I leveled the lawn, all on TV. It was all demonstrations I did for NBC in San Diego. And finally I was done with their garden. I planted street trees. You couldn't imagine what we did, put in raised beds, and then I was done. Luckily, that's just about when Wendy got a garden. So I went over to her, and I showed planting fruit trees, I showed double digging, I didn't need to level that lawn, it's beautifully level, but I say planting roses, I showed that, all kinds of things. And then I was again out of a set, and I asked friends in Del Mar, who had big properties, could I make a set on your land? And then suddenly I thought, well, if I would just cut down the trees. I had a huge group of trees and eucalyptus and some others, and I suddenly realized, cut down those trees. I had wandering paths there, and make a set there and leave the trees around the edge. So I cut them down, we dug out the roots, I put a fence all around it on the property line, and then I said to Ramondo in fall, please would you build me walls and fill with it. I gave him not potting soil, earth, good earth. We could buy topsoil in those days. Build walls. And I made this shape on the ground with hoses. So build me a wall here and a wall here and a circular island bed and more walls up higher, so we terraced the property. We brought in soil, and it reminds me of Bill Teague, a great gardener, who for his own yard, which was on a slope, he changed the surface of the ground by bringing in truckloads of topsoil. I didn't quite need to do that. I just bought a big pile of topsoil. While I was in Hawaii on vacation, Raimundo built the walls and filled them with the topsoil. And when I got back, I was ready to film TV on those platforms. One was my vegetable garden, or two or three were. One is that island bed. You probably have seen the pictures in my books where I grew wildflowers, planting in November and growing them in spring, and then things like melon in the summer. So it worked just beautifully. I had these platforms. I still have those terraces, and now I do other things with them. So that's how garden rooms worked for me, and each one is different and always has been different. Now, I mentioned wandering paths. I used to have wandering paths, and I realized they need destinations. I believe in patios. I've got 2 patios, one for winter, one for summer. Lots of you have heard me say this. I recommend 2 patios. If you've got side yards, look at those. If you've got a front and a back, look at those. Which one is shady in summer and which one is warm in winter? And there you have your answer, your winter and your summer patio. One time a gardener said to me, Pat, something I don't understand, and I think it was right here at Rogers Gardens. She said, I try to grow impatiens, and I can't grow them. And I want to ask you why I can't. My neighbor across the street grows the most gorgeous impatiens, and mine always wilt. What is the reason? And I said, well, that's very easy to answer. Your house faces south and hers faces north. So study the sun and shade in your garden and plant the plants that go well in each. Another good tip is to use color schemes and numbers. The best numbers to use, and this is from the Japanese, so I take a bit from here, a bit from there. 1, 3, 5, and 7. When you've got more than that, you've just got a drift or a bunch. It doesn't matter. But if you're just a few plants, be sure to use those numbers. 4 plants just don't look good. 2 plants don't look good. Don't ask me why. It's the human eye or something. So use your numbers. And also, think about color and color schemes. I said to a friend of mine who was really very talented, still living a few miles away, and I mentioned to her once, I said, do you have a color scheme? And she said, no, I never thought of it. So I said, well, kind of suggest doing that. It's a good idea. And the next time I went there, she said, oh, Pat, I'm all excited. I have a color scheme now. Red, and every flower in her garden is red. Well, she loved red, but that's not what I meant. And Vita Sackville West made a white garden with all the shades of white. And you know, I think that was great because you know she lived up in that tower and she looked down on her garden and at night you could see the white flowers, so I understand it. But even though Vita Sackville West is one of my, not angels, but one of the people I admire most in gardening and in writing, I don't think she was right that white is a color scheme. So I'm going to give you a few examples. First, let me tell you, well, I'll tell you later about Alice Menard. When you drive through New England, and I haven't been there lately, but just a few years ago I was there, and I still found it so. Everywhere you go in New England, you find one color scheme. And I call it the Patriotic Colors. And what it is red, white, and blue. And everywhere you go, you see red, white, and blue. Now you don't say to yourself, oh my God, Patriotic Colors. It looks pretty, it's great, it's a good color scheme. I don't think people stop and criticize it for being a simple patriotic color scheme. It looks, it's just great looking. You know, it's a very good color scheme. So I went once to this, well, no, I'm going to back up a little bit. So then I want to suggest another color scheme that I learned from a friend of mine who was a great gardener. And she loved making little pots. And from her, I learned the spring colors. The spring colors look wonderful in one part of your garden, especially in springtime. They look wonderful in a pot. And these are the spring flowers. First, you change the red, and instead of red, white, and blue, have pink, white, and blue. Is that a good pink? No, I've got a better pink. Here's a pink. Pink, white, and blue. And add yellow. And if you want, add lavender. That is a great color scheme. And it's easy to do. Just remember, switch the red for pink. Add lavender and yellow. And that's what you have. Now, there was a great gardener. I wonder how many of you remember her. Her name was Alice Menard. And one time I went to her garden, and she was a teacher of gardening in Lakeside. And it was back in the era of lots of water. She had plenty of water. And the minute I walked into her garden, I asked her, Alice, do you have a color scheme? Here's the thing, I could see she had one. I'd never seen a more gangbuster flower garden, and she poured on the water. It was not drought resistant. This is back in the day, we had plenty of water. And so she was all right doing that. And she said, yes, Pat, I have a color scheme, and I call it the sun colors. And what the sun colors are, all the colors of sunshine, including orange and yellow and red and all the shades of red. Anything you see in when the sun is shining, even in the evening. And then she said, I add, and pink, I didn't mention, but that was in there too, because of course, sky is sometimes pink. And she added white. She said, I add white for the clouds, and then I add blue for the sky. That's the sun colors. And it's a gangbusters color scheme. But she said, don't ever put lavender in it. She says, lavender kills the effect. I'm quoting her. I can hear her in my ear. I want to tell you, she came to a tragic end, and one of my daughters told me, don't ever tell that story. I love my daughter, but I'm going to tell you that macabre story. What happened is, she began having trouble with her husband, and one day she was having a great struggle with water. It was the drought, and she lived in Lakeside, and she knew this way to garden with water and with annual plants, which, by the way, I don't grow, but we did then, and she grew those totally. All these annual plants that used lots of water and lots of color, and she knew how to do it. And lots of roses, huge rose garden also with a color scheme. And she was pouring water on the ground, and her husband was leaving her. And she was teaching, but she was running out of money. She had a lot of trouble. One morning, she went out to get her mail, and bang, a car hit her, and she died instantly. I always thought that was great timing. Anyway. Okay, there's one color scheme I haven't mentioned, and that is south of the border. Okay, a south of the border color scheme, I'm going to take the white out because is all the flashing colors. So you can keep the orange and add magenta. Add magenta and purple and chartreuse. This is all I could find yesterday for chartreuse. Kind of clashing colors, and it's great with Spanish houses and against white walls. I don't know whether you can visualize. This pink is not quite pink enough. You need brilliant colors. And I'll put more purple. But things that kind of clash. And it looks great with a Spanish house or in a patio with Bougainvillea drooping over walls. And by the way, if you have planted a Bougainvillea in your patio and your neighbor gets the flowers and you get none, I'll tell you what that comes from. You plant it against the wall and the neighbor has the sun on the other side of the wall. And if that happens, your Bougainvillea is always going to go over there and give them a good time. And you'll have nothing but bare stems. Whoops, almost dropped something. Okay, now, good thing I brought my notes. Okay, here's another tip. Choose the easiest and the most spectacular plants you can grow. And by this, and those you want to plant. So look around, look at your neighbors, look at the colors that are bright and that give you a lot of bang for the buck. Buy those. Not only that, buy the best varieties. If you're buying any plant, and look up the varieties. Get a named variety. This is never more important than when you are buying a wisteria. First you decide, do I want a Chinese wisteria or a Japanese wisteria? If I want the biggest splash of color, I will buy a Chinese wisteria because they bloom in spring on bare wood before the leaves come out with gangbusters bloom. And Japanese wisterias are also beautiful, and especially good if you've got a tall arbor because the flowers hang down. Japanese wisterias bloom during the time the leaves come out, but the flowers last longer and are tall and drip down. So you kind of choose what's going to work better for you. Don't just go to Home Depot, which is a good place to go. Home Depot has very good plants now. But if you see one that just says Chinese wisteria or Japanese wisteria, don't buy it. Be sure it has a name. You can look up what the name means and what kind of a plant that is, but be sure to plant a named variety. And here's why. If you plant a Japanese wisteria and it's not a named variety, it just says Japanese wisteria, it is going to be inferior. It won't bloom for 12 years, and it will be an inferior color. And the reason is all wisterias grow on the roots of Japanese wisterias, and when they just sell that, they planted it from a seed, and it's always inferior. So your named varieties are selected, and this goes throughout all plant kingdom. Be sure, I mean, Torrey pines don't have varieties, but other plants, loads of them, like callistemon, which is bottle brush. Yes, you could buy varieties. Yes, they're much better than the ordinary kind. And there are so many plants that are so much more spectacular if you buy the named variety. Here's an idea that comes to mind. Plumbago is a wonderful named variety. In fact, there are a couple of them. Be sure when you buy Plumbago today, you get the named variety. Eventually it will grow big like the other one, but you're going to have much better bloom. Now, I do have the other one. Am I going on too long? I do have the other Frank Lloyd Wright. Small house, but wonderful. Tucked against the bank in Del Mar, tucked back against the hill with this garden in front. So what was I going to say there? I've lost the thread. I got on the jump. Pardon me? Ah, good. So I planted plumbago around little tiny kind of pinkish white bloom, just gorgeous. It makes a mat of green. It comes up in spring with the rains or in fall with the rains. It makes a mat of green, and then in spring come these lovely flowers all over it. And I actually had a friend once come and try to pull it out of my garden. She thought it was oxalis. That's before it bloomed. That didn't bother me, because you can't get rid of that plant. And it's wonderful. You can't get rid of it. You can't pull it out. So some of those invasive things are great. Santa Barbara daisy, I also love that one. And there are a few other oxalis you can get going in your garden if you're lucky. They come back and back and back. So I'd also like to mention, let's see, I was going to mention, okay. Some plants bloom in waves of bloom, and those are great too. some Mediterranean plants or plants adapted to the Mediterranean climate zone bloom in waves of bloom. Bougainvillea, for instance, very often will put on a spectacular bloom more than once a year. And by the way, have you ever noticed that Bougainvillea blooms on new wood? So if you want to keep it about the same size, after it's bloomed, be sure to cut off those stems that are bloomed, because they're not going to bloom again. It's going to bloom on the new wood that comes out. So you want to cut it back a little so it makes new wood, and then that will bloom. There are all these little tips and hints that make gardening easy. Another one that blooms in waves of bloom is Russellia. Now, Rogers Gardens did have one, and this is what they've got here. Russellia equisetiformis, and it doesn't have a real leaf. Equisetiformis means like a horsetail, so it has foliage like a horsetail. Now this is one of the new varieties. It's much, much smaller than the old wild one from Mexico, from the mountains of Mexico that I have. I have that old one. I found it, I saw it first when I was up in Los Angeles in my 20s maybe, 30s maybe, and it was at the Botanical Garden at UCLA, and I adored it, but they didn't have any, and it was covering a bank with this gorgeous red flowers and cascading down. And I thought, oh my goodness, I wish I could get that plant. Then I went one time to the Botanical Garden in San Diego County, which we used to call Quail Gardens. It's in Encinitas, the San Diego Botanical Garden. And I saw little tiny pots of the wild kind of Russellia before they hybridized it. And I took them home and I planted those small plants under a palm tree above a wall. Now you wouldn't believe the color. It took that many years. I mean, it took me almost 60 years to grow them. They're now about that tall, I would say. You see it that way in Hawaii, because they grow it in Hawaii, and I think they call it coral plant there. And hummingbirds love it, and I love it. And actually, I have got good news, because my daughter planted the hybrid above a small wall, about like that, and it's getting much more colorful, and it's blooming more, and it's bigger, and that's global warming. Global warming is very bad, no doubt about it. It's a terrible thing. It's doing awful things to us, but some good things. That's life on this planet, isn't it? So global warming is making some plants grow much, much bigger. Some trees much, much bigger than they ever grew before. And some plants that were a bit too mini, much, much bigger. I suppose that's why yesterday, when a friend, Susie, and I went to look for pony packs, we couldn't find any. They were all, no pony packs anymore. No, we're too big. Now we're at 4-inch. So that's life. We have to adapt, and it's very funny. So plant in big drifts. Okay, that's easy with these big plants. That's a very English idea. Penelope Hobhouse years ago came to San Diego County, and I was so darn glad that they asked me if I would have her stay in my house. And I said, well, of course. Lou, by now, by the way, had passed away tragically. He died at age 75, and I still miss him. What a wonderful guy. But anyway, the next year, Penelope came to visit me, and I'd also made friends with Christopher Lloyd, and he invited me to stay with him, and when I went to England, I did. And Penelope was there, so just before dinner, I got dinner ready. She'd done a talk that day. I went back to her bedroom, knocked on her door, and I said, what would you like to drink? I'm going to have a martini. And she said, thank God. She had been staying with a lot of Americans who don't drink, or were ashamed to offer her a drink or something, God only knows. Anyway, we had martinis, we had a jolly time. And she said to me, Pat, the thing I most love about your garden is that you plant in big drifts. Whatever you have, if you love it, if it grows well, plant a lot of it. It's much easier that way. And so many gardens, even with great gardeners, you see a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that, a little bit of that. That doesn't a garden make. Big drifts. So the herbaceous border in England, Christopher Lloyd, he was a master at it. Yeah, he didn't just put in a few of those colorful plants. He put a lot of them. And then next to that, a lot of something else that was gangbusters color with it. And not just, you know, Victorian gardening is one this, one that, one that, one that. Well, fine if you want to do it. You know, if that's what you like, why not? We're here to enjoy. But for me, it's planting a lot of it. And it's easier that way. So finally, I'd like to mention what I think Chuck Klein, you know who Chuck Klein was? He was the horticulturist at SeaWorld. And Lou and his wife Lois and I we made a great foursome. It was fun knowing them. He said to me once, Pat, every garden needs water in some other form than the garden hose. And what he meant is you need a fountain. And he was so right. So when you come into my garden under the pergola, because now I have not only arbors, but pergolas and places to sit in the shade under them, and we live in the garden. So he came in or through that entry, but now if he came today, there's a big fountain there that runs all day long on a timer, and we fill it every couple of days, and the birds come, and the beneficials are kept alive, and the garden is a living place. There's something I want to finish with, which is the idea of living in your garden. I want to tell you, someone mentioned that I paint. Yes, I have painted in watercolor and oils all my life. My father taught me how to paint watercolors when I was 10 years old on Pond Island, a wonderful family island, my American family. My grandmother was an American, Lady Fisher Smith, American who married an Englishman. And Pond Island came to me through Grandma, and we go and stay there. Now I lost the thread. Damn it, this is what happens when you're 90.
Watercolors.
Yes. Dad was out there painting with, thank you, with the cousins all the time in front of the big house. And I watched them and I thought it was so lovely seeing them lined up painting the view. And I was so admiring. And then the next morning, Dad said to me, Pat, how would you like if I come and paint with you tomorrow, and I'll teach you to paint? I said, oh, that'd be wonderful. Of course, I already painted as a kid, Will. But we went, and he had chosen this spot, which is one of my favorite, or was one of my favorite spots on Pond Island, where we went across a meadow on the way to the haunted lighthouse, and there was a big log there, and there were trees and a path. And he sat me next to him, and he demonstrated. And he had brought paints for me, watercolors for me, watercolors for him, and water and everything. He brought everything. And he set me up with my supplies. And then when we each had paper about that big on a board, and he said, okay, Pat, this is what you do. You draw yourself a picture. And I drew the trees and the path and the sky and the earth in front. So it was very simple. And there was one rather beautiful tree. And then he said, we paint the sky first in watercolor. And everything's backward in oils. When you learn oils, everything's backwards. And in watercolor, we go from light to dark. And in oils, when someday you learn oils, you go from dark to light. So he taught me all that in that first lesson. Then he took his page and he drew his line for the horizon. And he mixed up blue and water. And then he turned the page upside down. And he said, Pat, you turn your page upside down and paint your sky first, upside down. And then what happens is the darkest paint flows to the top of the sky. You can see it right now, where the blue is darker and it's whiter towards the horizon. I never forgot that. I'm still doing it. I'm still, when I do a watercolor, holding my page upside down, letting the water go down. And then he taught me more. I won't continue with it. I'd love to, but it's online. And I think if you look it up under Nana's painting tips, or I'm trying to remember, Nana's, I think it's Nana's painting tips. I forget exactly. Oh, it's also got a title like The Joy of Painting, but that's not. Paint Life Grand. Got it. Thank you, brain. Thank the brain. Paint, look up online, Paint Life Grand. And then it's Nana's painting tips, and it tells the whole story about Dad teaching me to paint that first time. Now this is what I want to tell you in my final thought. Once you've made this garden, don't do like we used to do when we were young, and I did. I never used to sit in my garden. I was too busy seeing some mistake I needed to fix. I only worked in my garden. Now I live in it. I sit in it. I take my glass of wine out there in the evening with some cheese and crackers. I enjoy the birds. I enjoy the flowers and the beautiful view of the ocean. And I'm out there enjoying it. And the best of all ideas I think I ever had, I got from Agatha Youngblood, a great gardener, if any of you ever knew her. She had a painting group called the Painting Ladies that came and painted with her once a week. I tried to get them to come to my house and continue, but the tragedy is they all gave up painting. I didn't. So I invited other people. And at least 3 of them are here today. And once a week, every Thursday, except I'm going to the races one Thursday. Usually year-round, when Francie's taking me to the races. And she wants a Thursday. Okay, just this once. I'll give up my Thursday. But every Thursday, you will find us in the garden, and even the chairs have a color scheme, which I got out of a book on Mediterranean gardening. I'll tell you about that, I think. I have time to tell you that color scheme. Anyway, we sit out there, we have the greatest time. I prepare a buffet lunch, and I love doing it. Susie and I go to Costco and get all the stuff. And lots of fruit and vegetables and tomatoes from the garden. And I love fixing this buffet. But by the end of the day, I couldn't put it all away. Well, guess what? One of the painting ladies, dear thing, volunteers. She goes in there when she has to leave and she cleans up all the food. But here's something else I want to tell you. It's self-serve. You go, you get your own. Also, we have coffee in the morning. You make your own with a Keurig. And then we have champagne in the afternoon. I always have champagne on ice, and Pop opens the bottle, and we're out there sipping our champagne. Okay, we need things to put the champagne glasses on. So what do I have? I have made the upper patio more and more artistic. Years ago, I had all my wooden garden furniture, which I've still got, 62 years old and some older. Had it painted in some beautiful Mediterranean colors I found in a book, of all things, printed in England. And that book had the most marvelous colors of furniture in that garden. Sometime I'll show you the book. I took those exact colors. There was a gorgeous blue, kind of a periwinkle blue. There was a red that was not a bright red. It's got a little blue in it, and a little pink in it, but it's red. Amazingly, it goes, your sweater is almost the color, though it's a bit orange. But there's pink in the one, and it looks wonderful with the blue. Then there's a bright yellow. I painted my chaise lounges that color. And now, who could guess? These colors are available on some outdoor wicker furniture that is weatherproof, and I bought new stuff as well, added to some of the old stuff. Didn't have to paint them. They've taken my colors. Anyway, they work. And they've all got cushions. And then I got the idea, I just adore, we need somewhere for the champagne. I just adore those wonderful elephant stools that used to be made in China or Japan. And now I don't know where they're made, Southeast Asia. I have gradually bought 3 of those, all different colors, for the patio. I have one antique one in my office. It's not going to go outside. I have 2, one on each side of an arbor for your champagne glasses in the bottom of the garden. And note my numbers. Now, I do have 2 under the arbor, but the arbor has 2 sides. So you don't suddenly say, oh dear, 2 elephants. You only see 1 at a time. So there's 1 here and 1 here. But in the patio, I take real joy. There are 3 elephants. And I never liked it when I only had 2. Anyway, I think that might do it. And, oh, one more thing. The aging gardener and the aging garden. My daughter Francie, the oldest one, put in some railings in her garden of looked like cast iron black, and I thought, wow, what a great idea. She told me who she got to do the job, a man called Roberto, so I hired him, and by golly, now I've got these steps, over here and there you might have seen some photos in some of my books. All those steps now have a railing by them. So I can hang onto that railing, and I hope, if I'm not a total idiot another time, like I was this year, I'll hang onto that railing and not trip and be able to get all over my garden. So it's a matter of the garden aging to match the aging gardener. Thank you so much.
So I just want to say thank you to everybody who came. As we know, May 11th was Pat's birthday, so we want to invite everybody to join us in some cake. We have a card circulating around, so we'll have that down here too, so everybody can sign it. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate it so much.
Happy
Little cozy for our birthday girl.
birthday to you. so much. And you all have been so kind to me. I'm deeply, deeply touched. Thank you a million times.